Hello, my name is Marceline, or at least that's what they used to call me, before my mother looked me in the eyes on Thanksgiving Day and said, "From today on, consider yourself a stranger." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't slam the door. She just locked it. No warning, no reason, no goodbye. And a week later, after silence, after shame, I got an email from their lawyer. One line. Urgent. Call back immediately. Now tell me, why does a family that cut you off suddenly need your signature? What were they hiding behind that locked door all along? Thanksgiving in Asheville always smelled the same. Roast turkey, burnt yams, cinnamon candles, and tension so thick it could crack your teeth. I'd been chopping vegetables and washing dishes since sunrise, while the rest of them sipped wine and posted smiling group selfies in the backyard. No one asked where I was, but I was exactly where I always was, behind the scenes. The house hadn't changed. Same brown shutters, same squeaky front gate, same polished floors that dared you to scuff them. But that day, it didn't feel like home. It felt like a stage. And I wasn't in the cast anymore. I walked into the dining room carrying a tray of pumpkin pies, scanning the long table for my name card. Nothing. Every place was marked with golden script. Isolde, Cassian, Aunt Diane, even Cousin Robbie, who'd been arrested twice and still got a better seat than me. But not Marceline. Not anywhere. I leaned toward Isolde, my older sister, who was perfectly posed in her cashmere sweater and too expensive smile. "Hey, did my place card get left out?" She barely turned her head. "Oh, Mom thought you might prefer to sit closer to the kitchen, since you've been in there all day." Then she picked up her wine glass and turned away, like I was an inconvenience she was done dealing with. So I sat, on a stool at the end of the buffet table, next to the dog's bowl. They passed dishes to each other like I wasn't there. They made toasts without looking my way. When someone complimented the stuffing, my stuffing, Isolde took credit without blinking. I should have left. I should have stood up, slammed the plate down, made a scene, but I didn't, because I still thought maybe, just maybe, someone would notice. Maybe Mom would call me over. Maybe Cassian would speak up. Instead, Mom stood up from her place at the head of the table and tapped her glass. "I'd like to say something," she said. Her voice was smooth, performative, like she was giving a speech at a charity gala. "Family means everything to me. It's about loyalty, respect, and knowing your place." She turned toward me then, her smile sharp enough to cut bone. "And if you can't understand that, from today on, consider yourself a stranger. Don't come back." For a moment, the room didn't move. No one gasped. No one objected. Forks clinked. Someone cleared their throat. Then she turned her back and sat down. I didn't speak. I couldn't. My tongue felt glued to my teeth. My feet moved on their own, out of the room, down the hallway, toward the front door that I suddenly remembered didn't even have a key that worked anymore. As I reached for my purse, something slipped out and landed at my feet. It was a photograph, our last full family photo before Dad died. We were at the lake house, smiling, pretending. But my face had been cut clean out, not ripped, not folded, precision cut like someone had taken the time to erase me without leaving a wrinkle. I picked up my coat. My hand shook as I reached into my bag for the house key, still attached to the same pink keychain Dad gave me when I was 17. I stared at it like it had betrayed me. The front door opened behind me. Mom didn't look angry anymore. She looked satisfied. She said nothing. She just reached out and closed the door in my face. The click of the lock echoed louder than any scream. I stood on the porch, the cold creeping through my sweater sleeves. I didn't cry. Not right away. Instead, I just stood there. Like maybe if I didn't move, they'd open the door again and laugh, say it was a misunderstanding. But the door stayed shut. I walked. Down the porch steps, past the mailbox with their perfect last name etched in gold, down the tree-lined street where every house looked like a magazine cover. No one followed. No one called out. I tried to make sense of it as I walked. What had I done? Was it the time I refused to co-sign that loan for Isolde? Was it when I mentioned to Cassian that Mom had made me cancel my vacation to take care of Dad? Was it something smaller? Something invisible? I had always been the helper, the one who skipped birthday trips to clean up after Mom's luncheons, the one who drove Dad to chemo when no one else showed up, the one who paid the water bill once when Cassian forgot. But none of that mattered now. I stopped at the corner of the block and sat down on the curb. The streetlights were flickering on, one by one, like it was the city's way of saying, "The show's over, go home." But I didn't have a home anymore. I pulled out my phone, thought about calling my friend Ava, thought about texting Cassian, thought about calling my mom and apologizing, even though I didn't know what for. Instead, I powered the phone off and slid it into my bag. That night, I didn't just lose my seat at a table. I didn't just lose four walls and a roof. That night, I lost the version of myself that thought I still belonged to them. That night, I didn't lose my family. I lost my place in their memory. It was almost noon when I finally opened my eyes. The sunlight filtering through Ava's floral curtains was too cheerful for how I felt. My neck ached from the lumpy couch cushion I'd been curled up on, and my spine reminded me I hadn't slept in a real bed in days. The soft hum of her dishwasher in the next room was the only sound. No yelling, no whispers, just quiet. I pushed the blanket off, sat up slowly, and looked around. Ava's apartment wasn't fancy. 2 bedrooms, mismatched furniture, walls full of thrift store art. But it was warm, safe. She'd offered me her couch before I even finished explaining what happened, said she didn't need details, just told me to come over. That kind of kindness felt foreign, even suspect. My phone lit up on the coffee table, dozens of notifications, but not from anyone who mattered. 50% off your holiday must-haves. Last chance to save. I deleted them without reading more. No calls from Mom, no messages from Isolde. Not even a question mark from Cassian. They really meant it. I was no longer one of them, not even as an afterthought. Ava walked out of her bedroom wearing an oversized hoodie, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "Morning. Or afternoon, I guess," she said softly, setting one mug down in front of me. "Thanks," I murmured, wrapping both hands around the warmth. She sat beside me, but didn't say anything more. Just gave me space. Maybe that's why I let myself remember. It wasn't just what Mom said last night. It was everything before that. Every invisible jab leading up to the moment she made it official. Last year's Thanksgiving, my place card was spelled wrong, Marceline. When I pointed it out, Isolde laughed and said, "Maybe that's your rebrand." I laughed too. I always laughed along. This year, there was no card at all, no seat at the main table. When I asked, they told me I'd be more comfortable near the kitchen. "You know, since you've been helping all day." Like I was hired help. And the chair? It wasn't even a real one. It was a folding metal thing, the kind we bring out for kids who won't sit still. They'd tucked it behind the wine cart, barely within earshot of the dining room. Halfway through dinner, Uncle David asked, "Wait, is Marceline not here this year?" I raised my hand and said, "Right here." He blinked, chuckled nervously, and turned back to his plate. No one even laughed. I wasn't supposed to be visible. I was supposed to serve, smile, stay out of the way. Ava nudged me gently. "You okay?" I looked at her and realized I hadn't said a word in 10 minutes, just stared into my coffee like it might hold answers. "I'm fine," I said. A lie. But also the truth. I wasn't okay, but I wasn't broken either. I was awake. "You want to talk about it?" she asked, cautious. "Not yet." I stood up, walked to the window, and pulled the curtain back. Outside, the city moved on without me. Cars passed, kids rode bikes, people had errands to run and turkeys to reheat. The world doesn't stop spinning just because someone stops loving you. I turned away from the window and sat at the small kitchen table with my coffee. Reaching into my bag, I pulled out my notebook. It was the same one I'd used for grocery lists, budgeting, reminders to buy toothpaste. Today, it became something else. I flipped to a clean page and wrote, "Maybe the worst pain isn't being hated, it's being erased." And then I kept writing. About every holiday where I ended up doing dishes while Isolde mingled. Every time Mom handed her the credit for something I'd done. Every moment when Cassian, my baby brother, looked away instead of speaking up. I remembered the exact second last night when I looked at him. After Mom made her announcement, after she called me a stranger. He looked down at his plate, didn't even flinch, didn't move. He could have said something, just one word. Instead, he stayed silent, and that silence rang louder than Mom's cruelty. I threw the notebook across the table. It landed with a soft thud, flipping open to the first page. Maybe they never saw me. Not the real me, just the version of me that made things easier for them. The one who didn't make waves, who filled in the gaps, the extra body when someone needed help moving, the last-minute dog sitter, the one who didn't need acknowledgement, just purpose. It's funny how being useful can make you invisible. I poured the rest of the coffee down the sink, rinsed the mug, and returned to the couch. I should have gotten dressed, should have called my job to explain why I missed my shift, should have done something responsible. Instead, I sat there and stared at the ceiling, until, out of habit, I reached for my phone again. I didn't expect anything new, maybe another sale, another reminder that the world kept turning. I scrolled absently, deleted a few more emails, and then I saw it. Subject: urgent. Call back immediately. From Jacobs Price, LLP. My stomach turned, not from fear, from memory. That law firm had handled Dad's estate. I hadn't heard from them since the week after his funeral. I tapped to open it, my fingers suddenly cold. It was a name I hadn't seen in years, but it was attached to the people who just erased mine. Regarding your urgent request. That's all I typed in the subject line. Just enough to let them know I saw it. Just enough to make them sweat. I didn't click send yet. I stared at the blinking cursor for another minute, feeling my pulse steady. It was the first time in days I didn't feel like I was chasing air. It was the first time in years I felt like I held something they wanted. Ava came out of the kitchen with a box of crackers and 2 bottles of water. She caught the look on my face and froze. "You okay?" I looked at her, then back at the laptop screen. "No," I said, and then, as I pushed send, "But they're not either." The email itself was short, just a few lines from Jacobs Price, a name I hadn't spoken aloud since my father's will was finalized after his death. "Miss Caldwell, we are contacting you regarding an unresolved matter involving your participation as a necessary signatory in an estate-related transaction. Please contact our office immediately. Time sensitive." Time sensitive. That word hung in the air like perfume you couldn't scrub off. After all these years of pretending I didn't exist, after calling me a stranger at their precious Thanksgiving, they needed something only I could give. I leaned back, folding my arms. The audacity, the entitlement. They never imagined I'd be the one to hold the keys. I didn't call them directly. I called Jacobs Price, and the receptionist put me through to someone named Mr. Fielding. Polite, clipped, and clearly not prepared for the tone I carried. "Miss Caldwell, thank you for getting back to us. I assume you've read the details in the email?" "I have," I said, keeping my voice flat. Though I must say, it's fascinating to receive such an urgent request from people who recently disowned me. There was a pause, papers rustling in the background. A throat cleared. "I'm not at liberty to comment on family dynamics," he replied. "Our concern is purely procedural." "Of course," I said. "Let's keep it that way." He explained, carefully, that my father had placed a clause in the trust. A portion of the estate was bound to my signature. It couldn't be moved, altered, or released without my consent. "And no one told me this before?" I asked. "I can't speak to that," he said. "But you've spoken to them?" "Yes." "Who specifically?" "Your mother and Miss Isolde Caldwell." I let silence fill the line for a beat. Then two. "I'll have my legal representation reach out," I said. "Please don't contact me again directly." I hung up before he could answer. Ava walked in again, quieter this time. She placed a cup of tea beside me. "Was that them?" "Sort of," I said. "Lawyer. Not family, never family." She sat across from me, concern tightening her brow. You want to talk to my uncle? That was Ava, always one step ahead. Her uncle, Harold Morton, had been a probate lawyer in Asheville for over 30 years, semi-retired now, but still sharp, still connected. She called him. He agreed to meet that afternoon. It was almost dusk when we pulled into his driveway. Modest home, cluttered porch, wind chimes that danced every time a car passed. The smell of chimney smoke and pine needles filled the air. Ava stayed in the car while I walked up alone. Harold opened the door wearing khakis, suspenders, and a face that had seen a lot of things but never flinched. "Marceline, is it?" he said, gesturing me inside. "Come in, let's see what mess they've made now." I handed him the forwarded email. He read it, eyebrows furrowing slightly, then asked for my full name, date of birth, and the year the trust had been created. He walked into the other room, returned 10 minutes later with a thick manila folder. "I thought so," he said, flipping through papers. "Your father, Charles, he came to me shortly after his second round of chemo, told me he didn't trust the rest of the family to handle things fairly if anything happened to him." I swallowed hard. "He didn't mention this to me," I said. "He wasn't sure how to," Harold replied. "He didn't want to paint your mother and sister as villains outright. But he saw things." He placed the papers in front of me. "This is the original version of the trust," he said. "It was filed before his final hospitalization. That portion they're referring to? It's a controlling interest in the Caldwell Property Group, nearly 40% of the operating assets." My hands trembled slightly. Harold continued. "Without your signature, nothing moves. No liquidations, no buyouts, no restructuring, and crucially, no inheritance distribution." I flipped to the back page. There it was. My name, in Dad's handwriting. Underlined. Not Isolda's, not Vera's, mine. It wasn't about the money. It was about the fact that, before he died, Dad saw me. He knew what they'd do, and he gave me the only thing they couldn't fake, legal leverage. I stared at the documents, and for the first time in days, maybe weeks, I felt something deeper than anger. I felt steadiness. Dad's voice floated back to me from one of those late-night conversations when he was on his third dose of pain meds and too tired to pretend. "One day, you'll hold it all together, even if no one says thank you." He hadn't been poetic. He wasn't the kind of father who gave big speeches, but he'd said that, quietly, sincerely, and now I understood what he meant. They could cut me out of photos, erase me from place cards, but they couldn't rewrite what was filed in ink at the courthouse. I closed the folder and looked up at Harold. "What happens if I don't sign?" "They can't move anything, not 1 cent. And if I challenge everything?" He raised an eyebrow. "Then they'll come crawling, but not because they miss you, because they need you." I thanked him, took the folder, and left. Back at Ava's apartment, I laid the documents out on the table. I stared at them for hours, letting the weight of them settle in, not just in paper, but in power. "They erased me," I whispered, brushing my fingers over the bold type of my own name. "But they forgot something." I turned to my laptop, opened my email again, drafted a response. Subject line, "Regarding your urgent request." They want a signature. I want something else entirely. I whispered that to myself as I stepped off their porch and pulled the front door shut behind me. Slowly, deliberately. No one chased after me. No one called my name. I didn't expect them to. They weren't used to anyone walking away from their carefully curated version of control. But that night, I didn't slam the door. I left it closed on purpose. Quiet, final. The air outside was brisk, the kind that crept down your collar and made you remember you were still alive. I welcomed it. I drove back to Ava's in silence. No music, no news, just the hum of the tires against the pavement and the ache in my jaw from biting down every insult I wanted to fling across that pristine dinner table. When I pulled into her driveway, the porch light was still on. She'd left a note taped to the door. "Tea's in the microwave. Don't hold it in. Talk when you're ready." Inside, I set down my bag, kicked off my boots, and sat on the edge of the couch. I didn't touch the tea. My mind was still back in that house. Rewind. The email came 2 days before. Isolda, ever the queen of artificial grace. "Let's talk. Family to family. Dinner at the house, Saturday. Come early. Bring any documents you may have so we can all move forward. Not a single apology, not even a pretend one. Harold, my lawyer, told me to bring someone with me. I brought the original trust documents. No waving them around, no confrontational folder slamming. I just wanted them close, like armor under a jacket. That house hadn't changed much, but the energy in it had. Everything was too perfect. Candles flickering like a catalog shoot, matching plates and cloth napkins. Vera had even arranged fresh flowers, hydrangeas, which she hated. Fake peace always smells like perfume sprayed over mold. Cassian greeted me at the door, but didn't hug me. He nodded, like I was the neighbor's +1. That stung more than I expected. They ushered me to the table. I glanced down. No name card. Again. Everyone else had one. In gold cursive ink on embossed paper. Even Uncle Robbie, who hadn't shown up sober to anything since 2008, had a place setting. Me? A folded napkin and a bare plate. Isolde leaned in. We didn't want to presume. Figured you'd pick whichever seat you felt best in. I took the one farthest from Vera. Not out of fear. I just didn't want her breath near my food. Dinner began like a performance. They passed dishes, complimented one another, even toasted to new beginnings. Vera raised her glass. It's time to heal old wounds. I smiled but didn't drink. My wounds weren't old. They were still bleeding under the table. 15 minutes in, Isolde said what we all knew was coming. There are some documents we'd love your help signing, just to clean things up. Nothing complicated. Cassian looked at his lap. Vera poured herself more wine. It would mean a lot, Marceline. You know how confusing estate matters can get. I reached into my purse and pulled out the printed trust papers. Not dramatically, not aggressively, just enough to show I wasn't naive. These say otherwise, I said, sliding them across the table. Isolde didn't touch them. She just stared, blinking too slowly. We weren't trying to cut you out, she began. No? I asked. Then what do you call it when I'm not on any document you just presented? Vera chuckled, but it was tight, strained. I think you're misunderstanding how complicated these things can be. Your father wasn't exactly organized. I tilted my head. That's funny, because these are crystal clear. I pointed to the line with my name, bold, underlined, initialed by Dad himself. Look, Marcy, Isolde tried, using a nickname I hadn't heard since high school. We're all family. We want to move forward. You don't want to hold us back, do you? If you're going to pretend I was never part of this, at least try harder to erase the evidence, I replied. That shut her up. We finished dinner in silence. The lamb was good, probably catered. I stood up after dessert, smoothed my skirt, grabbed my purse. I came tonight because I was curious, I said, voice calm. Curious who you'd pretend to be when you needed me again. Vera folded her hands. Don't be dramatic. Isolde's lips were pressed so tightly together, they were barely pink. I took out an envelope and left it on the table. Inside was a copy of the trust and a post-it note I wrote that morning. You don't get to summon strangers with please. And then I walked out. I didn't speed. I didn't cry. Just before I reached the front door, I glanced back. Cassian looked up. His eyes met mine, for a fraction of a second, and I saw it. He blinked like a man realizing the house was burning, and he'd been sleeping in it. Outside, the cold wrapped around me like a second skin. As I walked down the steps, I whispered, they want a signature. I want something else entirely. They're running out of space to hide. That was the thought looping in my head as I stepped out onto Ava's back patio later that night, barefoot, a glass of water in my hand, and the folder Harold gave me tucked beneath my arm like a Bible. It was close to midnight. The sky was black, the stars dull behind clouds that hadn't made up their mind about rain. And I, for the first time in a long time, felt still. I didn't cry after the dinner, not when I got home, not when Ava asked how it went. I just nodded, went into the spare room, and sat on the bed until the sun began to rise. That's when I opened my voice recorder and said out loud, this time, I'm documenting everything. I said it like a promise, not to anyone else, just to me. That morning, while I was sipping coffee at Ava's kitchen counter, she handed me a yellowed envelope. Found this in Dad's old study drawer when I helped you pack it up last year, she said, setting it beside my laptop. Didn't open it, didn't even look at the name. But something told me it wasn't junk. The handwriting on the front stopped me cold. Dad's, no doubt. I opened it carefully, like it might crumble if I breathed too hard. Inside was a single sheet of lined notebook paper, folded in thirds, dated 6 months before he passed. No greeting, no sign-off, just him, his voice perfectly preserved. If you're reading this, I either got brave enough to give it to you, or I chickened out and someone else had to. Either way, I'm sorry. I see what's happening, what's always happened. I didn't stop it. I thought I was protecting the family by keeping peace, but I let you take the hits instead. You were always the one with the clearest heart. That's why I left the foundation to you. Not because you're the loudest or the favorite, but because you're the only one who knows how to build something that doesn't collapse the second someone leaves. Trust yourself, no one else, especially not the ones who call love a condition. I sat there staring at the last sentence, reading it again and again, especially not the ones who call love a condition. He knew, all along, he knew I wasn't safe here, not even after he was gone. I folded the letter slowly, pressed it to my chest for just a moment, then placed it back in the envelope. Not to hide it, but to protect it. Some things don't deserve to be tossed into drawers with junk mail and empty pens. That afternoon, while Ava was out running errands, I received another call. This one came from a number I hadn't seen in years. But the moment I heard her voice, I knew. "Marceline," came the raspy sound of my father's sister, Aunt May. "Is this still your number?" "It is," I said cautiously. "How are you?" She didn't bother with small talk. "I heard what happened," she said. "The dinner, the trust, Vera trying to keep you out." I blinked. That was fast. Nothing travels faster in this town than a scandal involving your sister. Her voice cracked, not from sadness but from restraint. "There's something you should know," she said. "Years ago, after Charles first got sick, Vera started pressuring him to adjust some of the estate documents, said it was time to streamline the process. Isolde was behind most of it, always whispering about public image and clean hands. I warned your father not to give them too much. I told him you were the only one who wouldn't twist the will to suit themselves." She paused, but I think he already knew that. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because you have the truth in your hands, and you're not 12 anymore. You don't need me to protect you. But I need you to know that you were never imagining it. The way they treated you, the way they froze you out, it wasn't an accident." That silence, the one I always mistook as my fault, suddenly felt like evidence. "Thank you," I said quietly. She didn't offer a blessing, didn't wish me luck, just whispered, "Make it count," and hung up. The next day, I scheduled a formal call with Jacobs Price. No email threads, no indirect messaging. I wanted their voices recorded. I wanted them to hear mine. It was a video call. They wore suits, stiff expressions, all "yes, ma'am," and "absolutely, Ms. Caldwell," but I wasn't here to be pacified. "I'm requesting a full audit," I said. "All estate activity from the last 5 years, any amendments filed, any communications referencing the trust, and I want the logs, emails between your firm and Vera Caldwell, also between Isolde Caldwell and any staff connected to the Caldwell Foundation." There was a pause. The lead attorney cleared his throat. "That's quite a request." "Not really," I replied. "It's basic due diligence when you're holding documents that affect millions in assets." He tried to smile. Failed. "We'll prepare the necessary paperwork." "One more thing," I said. "Don't mistake silence for ignorance. I'm not fighting for the money. I'm fighting to make sure it doesn't end up in the hands of people who destroy family and then write their version of history in the ashes." Click. End of call. That night, I sat on Ava's patio again. Same sky, same stars hiding behind clouds. I opened my notebook and scribbled. For years, I tried to be enough to be invited. Now I realize I was never meant to knock. I was meant to build my own door, somewhere they can't reach. Just as I was about to close the notebook, my phone buzzed. Cassian. The message was short. I found something. We need to talk. Not safe here. I stared at the screen. He hadn't reached out since Thanksgiving, since he stared at his plate while I was erased at the table. But something about his message felt different. They're running out of space to hide, I whispered. Then I tucked my notebook under my arm, grabbed my phone, and walked back inside. They're panicking. Good. I was still sitting at the kitchen table, the soft light of my laptop casting a glow across my half-empty teacup, when the knock came. 3 sharp raps, too firm to be polite, too precise to be confused with a neighbor. I froze. Not because I was afraid. No, that feeling had passed. This wasn't fear. This was anticipation. I muted the classical music streaming from my speakers, rose slowly, and walked toward the door. I didn't have to look through the peephole. I already knew who it was, but I looked anyway. Vera and Isolde. Vera stood with her arms folded like she owned the lease. Isolde was just behind her, lips tight, jaw clenched. I didn't see a car. They'd parked somewhere down the street, probably hoping not to be seen. They weren't here to visit. Ava wasn't home. She'd left for her sister's baby shower in Charlotte that morning and wouldn't be back until late. I was alone, but not unarmed. I opened the door, not wide, just enough. Marceline, Vera said. Not hello, not may we come in. Just my name, delivered like an order. I think we should talk, she added, the corners of her mouth twitching with something she hoped would pass for a smile. I think you should leave, I said. Calm, not cold, just steady. We didn't come to fight, Isolde jumped in, already stepping forward. We came to fix this, before it gets any more complicated. She had a folder in her hand. Thick. Official looking. I didn't move, but I also didn't stop her. She took that as permission and pushed past me, followed by our mother. They walked into Ava's living room like they still believed the world bowed to them. Vera sat down, crossed her legs, and looked around as if she were inspecting the furniture. We'd like you to sign these, Isolde said, placing the folder on the coffee table with a loud thump. It's just a technical thing. You're holding up everything. This isn't personal. I didn't sit. I stayed standing near the entryway, arms crossed, watching them the way you watch strangers handling your favorite vase. You're trespassing, I said. Vera waved a hand. Oh, please, you're being ridiculous. We're your family. No, you decided I wasn't. You're acting out of spite, Isolde snapped. Do you know how much damage you're causing? To the family name? To the foundation? I walked over to the kitchen counter where my phone was plugged in, picked it up, unlocked it, tapped once. My screen lit up with the live Zoom call already in progress. My lawyer's voice came through the speaker. We're recording. Isolde went pale. Vera stood up. What is this? This, I said, pointing at the phone, is insurance. You're in my home. You entered without an invitation. And you're demanding I sign documents under pressure. She glared at me. You think this will hold up in court? I don't care if it holds up in court, I said. I care that it holds up in the court of public opinion. And I care that my lawyer hears exactly how this family treats women they can't control. Vera's voice changed then. It dropped an octave, took on that harsh edge I remembered from childhood punishments. You always twist things, she hissed. Always the victim. You want sympathy, fine. Just don't act like you're better than us. I don't have to act, I said. She moved toward me then, fast. I wasn't ready for the slap, not fully. Her palm caught my cheek and the sting bloomed instantly. You're ruining everything, Isolde shouted, coming at me like she meant to grab the phone. But she never touched me. I pushed them both back, not hard, just enough, and they stumbled slightly. I held the phone high. I've got everything I need, I said. Every word. Every move. Leave. Now. They did. Not right away, not gracefully, but they left. And I didn't cry. I sat down, took a deep breath, and waited for the call to end. My lawyer's voice returned. We're filing the restraining order tomorrow. Do it. I filed the report the next morning. Quietly, efficiently, without fanfare, and I didn't tell a soul. Not Ava, not Cassian, no need. The legal notice went out 2 days later. Formal, professional, undeniable. This wasn't just family tension anymore. This was coercion, attempted fraud, premeditated manipulation. The letter read, in part, "You are to have no further direct contact with Marceline Caldwell. Any future communication must go through legal counsel. Any breach of this notice will result in immediate legal consequences." I didn't hear back from them, not directly, but the next day, Harold forwarded me an email. It was from his security consultant. They'd detected suspicious login attempts to the estate trust portal. The IP address? Vera's house. They were still trying to get in, still trying to rewrite things. But it was too late, because I'd already learned how to read every clause, every loophole, every trap they'd tried to set. I sat at the desk in Ava's guest room that night, lit only by the glow of a desk lamp and a sense of finality. "You threw me out," I whispered. "Now I'm locking the doors, legally." There was no rage left in me, just precision. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about refusing to be erased. A soft ping sounded on my phone. I checked the screen. Unauthorized login attempt. Family Trust Portal. IP 192.168.2.7. Home address. They were panicking. I leaned back, cracked my neck gently, and let the silence settle around me. Good. Let's finish this. That thought echoed in my chest the next morning as I stepped onto Ava's porch with a fresh mug of coffee and her terrier sleeping soundly by my feet. The fall air had lost its softness. There was a bite in it now, something that reminded me change wasn't coming. It had already arrived. I hadn't slept much, maybe 3 hours at most, but it was enough. When the system that's been squeezing you finally cracks, sleep doesn't matter. Fire does, direction does, and I had both. The court date was set, full estate hearing, public, no more backdoor phone calls, no more wine-glass diplomacy or whispered coercion. Now they'd have to answer with the truth under oath, or at least try to bend it in front of someone who could call them on it. I took a sip of coffee just as Ava stepped outside, wrapped in her robe. "You okay?" she asked. "I'm not sure okay is the right word," I said, "but I'm ready." We didn't speak after that. We didn't have to. I spent the day organizing files, legal papers, photos, text threads, calendar entries. Every slip of documentation they'd ignored or twisted, I now held in my hands like arrows. But even so, I wasn't aiming to destroy them. That's not what this was about anymore. It was about stopping the rot, before it swallowed anyone else whole, and just when I thought I had accounted for everything, Ava walked over with her phone. "You need to see this," she said, her voice low. She handed it to me. It was a screenshot from a local Facebook group, a neighborhood moms forum, mostly used for bake sales and lost pets. This post, though, was different. So sad to see a family torn apart by one bitter daughter. Some people just want attention, even if it costs them everything. There were comments below. Wasn't she the one who didn't show up to her dad's memorial? Heard she's been trying to sue her own mother. Unbelievable! I scrolled down and saw someone had posted a blurry photo of me at the courthouse steps. I wasn't looking at the camera. I was holding my binder, head down, hair in a tight bun. The caption? Her. That's the one making a scene. Twist S12 wasn't subtle anymore. It was weaponized. I knew immediately where it had come from. Vera had always been polite in public, but only when she needed to be. Her cruelty wasn't loud. It was whispered, planted, passed hand to hand like gossip on silver trays. This was just a new stage. They'd taken years of character assassination and turned it into public fodder. And it was working. I closed the phone slowly, handed it back to Ava. "You're not going to respond?" she asked. "No," I said. "They want a reaction. I'll give them results instead." An hour later, my phone rang. Isolde. I almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. But something told me to pick up. Her voice was wrecked from the start, not hoarse, shaky. "Marceline, I'm here," I said. "Please," she whispered. "I can't sleep. I can't eat. It's falling apart. You have no idea what this is doing to us." "But I do," I said. There was a pause. "I'll lose everything." Still nothing resembling an apology. She went on. "What do you want to make this stop?" I didn't speak right away. I let her sit in it, let her fumble. Finally, I said, "Nothing I want is yours to give." And then I hung up. Twist S16, deployed, and buried. That evening, just after sunset, there was another knock at my door. This time, I didn't need to check the peephole. I knew it was Cassian. He stood there holding a slim folder and a look I hadn't seen on him since we were kids. Truth and fear. "I didn't know where else to go," he said. "Come in," I replied, stepping aside. We sat at the table. He pushed the folder across to me. "I found this in Dad's safety deposit box." I was listed as a backup contact if Vera passed. Inside were photos, handwritten notes, and one document that felt like it stopped the earth for a second. My birth certificate. Mother. Unknown. Cassian's voice broke the silence. "She's not your mother, not biologically. Dad met her when you were 2. She raised you, yes, but she never accepted me," I finished. He nodded. "I think part of her resented you. You were a reminder that Dad had a life before her, that he chose you again and again, and she couldn't erase that." Twist S20 was complete. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just felt the floor beneath me shift into something firmer, not warmer, not kinder, just real. Cassian wiped his eyes. "I didn't protect you because I didn't want to lose the rest of them," he said. "But now I see. They were never mine to lose." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "It's not too late to stop being part of it," I said. After he left, I went outside. There's an old orchard behind Ava's rental, just a few dying apple trees and a stone bench that's crooked from erosion. I walked out there barefoot, feeling the earth, the broken sticks, the cold dampness of fading grass. I screamed, just once, and it wasn't rage, it was release. Then I stood there breathing until I felt like a whole person again. Not someone's daughter, not someone's burden, just me. When I walked back in, I sat down and wrote one letter. No name, no signature, just, "Thank you for confirming I was never yours. You've just made it easier to leave." I mailed it that night. The next morning, I poured my coffee, checked my inbox, and found it. Court date confirmed, full estate hearing, Caldwell v. Caldwell et al. Public record. I closed my laptop. Let's finish this. Now they don't even know where I'll rebuild from. The hotel room was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that came after the storm, when even the wind seemed afraid to rustle the curtains. I sat at the edge of the bed with the house deed in one hand, my father's letter in the other, and the courthouse docket glowing softly from my open laptop on the desk. Everything I needed for the final confrontation was lined up, numbered, sealed in labeled folders. Tomorrow, it wouldn't be whispers in dining rooms or passive-aggressive texts. It would be court, witnesses, documents, a judge, and for the first time, accountability. That morning, I dressed with intention, not for vanity, for clarity. Navy blue blazer, white blouse, a pair of simple flats. I wasn't there to impress. I was there to finish what they started the day they slammed that door in my face. Ava dropped me off at the courthouse. She didn't come inside. She just held my hand for an extra second and said, "Go make it count." The building was cold and modern. Gray walls, glass doors, buzzing fluorescents that hummed over nervous murmurs in the hallway. I walked through security, showed my ID, and entered the room. Vera and Isolde were already seated with their lawyer at the long table across from mine. They looked polished, but you could see the fraying edges. Vera clutched her handbag like it was an oxygen tank. Isolde's lipstick was too bright, too desperate. I nodded to my lawyer, Harold, and we sat. Local reporters were there too. Quiet, observant, with notepads and discreet cameras. This case wasn't just a family squabble anymore. It had become a headline. Court is now in session. The judge, a woman in her 60s with the kind of eyes that had seen every kind of lie, asked for opening statements. I didn't speak. Harold did, calm, factual, no embellishment. Then came the documents. Twist S8 entered the courtroom like a thunderclap. The original trust, signed, notarized, witnessed by two unrelated parties. Clear designation. I held 40% controlling interest in the Caldwell Foundation. Without my consent, nothing moved, not funds, not property, not titles. Then came the digital evidence. Isolda's access logs, emails from her personal account to the legal team, pretending to be me, IP addresses traced directly to her home network. A sharp intake of breath from one of the reporters. Even the court clerk stopped typing. The judge removed her glasses and stared at Isolda. "This is not a minor clerical error," she said. "This is textbook impersonation, bordering on criminal fraud." Isolda's mouth opened, then closed again. Her lawyer leaned over and whispered furiously. The judge continued, "Without Miss Caldwell's signature, no part of this estate can be lawfully transferred. And based on these findings, I am formally referring this case to the district attorney's office for further investigation." Vera finally spoke then. "This is our family," she said, voice tight. "We should be allowed to fix this ourselves." The judge replied without flinching. "You had decades to fix it. Now the court will." Harold stood again. "Your Honor, we are also filing for immediate possession of the Caldwell home, originally deeded to my client by her late father and currently occupied without legal right." The judge looked at me. "Do you wish to speak, Miss Caldwell?" I stood. I didn't read from notes. I didn't bring tears. "I'm not here to punish anyone," I said. "But I'm not here to be erased either. My father trusted me with something real. They tried to take that away. All I've done is protect what was already mine." The room was silent. The judge nodded. "Motion granted. Occupants are to vacate the premises within 72 hours. Twist S19. Executed." I sat back down and exhaled, my spine finally loosening. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just breathed. "I'm not happy they lost," I whispered to Harold. "I'm relieved I survived." As we walked out, Vera reached for my arm. "Marceline, please." I turned to her slowly, met her eyes. "You said I was a stranger," I replied. "I believed you." And I kept walking. The headlines hit by late afternoon. Caldwell Estate, shaken by internal fraud. Dia looks into family trust forgery. The local paper ran a full piece the next morning. Friends of the family who had once been happy to toast their holidays with Vera and Isolda suddenly went quiet. Some sent vague texts of support to me. Most didn't. I didn't need them. Batul Cassian sent me a photo that night. It was Vera and Isolda standing on the front lawn of the Caldwell home, now legally mine, packing suitcases into the trunk of a rental car. There was no caption, just the image. I stared at it for a long time, then saved it. That evening, I checked into a hotel a few blocks away. I didn't want to go back to Ava's just yet. I needed space to think, space to plan. I sat on the bed with the deed in one hand and my father's letter in the other, the only two things that had never lied to me. "They threw me out," I whispered. "Now they don't even know where I'll rebuild from." And that was the part that mattered most. Because I finally did. "Mommy?" The word was soft, almost unsure, like the girl hadn't quite decided if she was allowed to say it yet. I turned slowly from my desk, where I'd just finished filing intake forms for 2 new residents at the center. Her small frame stood in the doorway, backlit by the mid-morning sun pouring through the hallway. Her hair was still wet from her bath, little curls stuck to her cheeks. Her eyes, wide, brown, alert, were watching me closely. I smiled, setting down my pen. "Yeah, baby?" I said, just as soft. She ran toward me and wrapped her arms around my waist, her head pressing into my stomach like she was anchoring herself to something solid. I didn't correct her. I didn't remind her I wasn't officially anything yet, that her paperwork was still being processed, that our arrangement was temporary. None of that mattered to her, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like someone's maybe. 3 months had passed since the hearing, since Vera and Isolde were ordered to leave the house they once called theirs. Since I took possession of the property, handed over the keys to a nonprofit group I trusted, and walked away from the building that raised me but never held me, I'd rebuilt elsewhere, downtown Asheville. A modest suite in a mixed-use building off Haywood Street. Second floor, with old brick walls, a narrow staircase, and a name etched in frosted glass across the front door. The Haven Center, for women rebuilding after family trauma. Underneath, in smaller type. Director, Marceline Hart. Not Caldwell, Hart. Twist S17 came quietly. I'd filed the name change 2 weeks after the court ruling, not out of spite, not to erase what had come before, but to stop carrying the weight of a name that was never mine to begin with. Caldwell was a history written by other people. Hart was mine. The judge at the hearing for the name change had asked, "Why Hart?" I'd answered honestly, because it comes from truth, not blood. That morning, I wore a new badge, simple, gold-lettered, just Miss Hart. No initials, no titles. I'd asked the staff to call me that, same as the women who came through our doors. Every woman who walked in carried something heavy. Some were coming out of custody battles, others from generational pain. Some just needed to sit down for a minute and say out loud, "I don't want to keep surviving like this." We weren't saving anyone here, just witnessing them, helping them hold the weight until they could hold it themselves. Twist S21 wasn't part of the plan. Not at first. But there she was, Amaya, 6 years old, foster file full of gaps, bounced through 3 homes in 2 years. The social worker brought her by during an emergency placement. Something about the center's calm made them think she might respond better here. I said yes before I had time to doubt myself. And now, "Mommy?" I bent down and kissed the top of her head. "Want to help me with something?" I asked. She nodded. I walked her back to the main room, where volunteers were folding blankets and prepping supply bags. I gave her a tiny clipboard with stickers, and she beamed like I'd handed her the world. Later that afternoon, I walked through the city park nearby. It had become a ritual. The place where I processed my days, not because the scenery was grand, it wasn't, but because it felt untouched by the mess that had come before. I passed a young mother with her daughter on the swings. The girl's laugh floated into the air like wind chimes. The mother caught my eye, nodded in that way women do when they recognize something shared, and just like that, my throat tightened. Not from sadness, from possibility. It was strange, after everything, that the ache I used to carry like a second spine had turned into something else. Something softer, still present, still real, but no longer owning me. I sat on a bench, watching a squirrel dart across the path, and let the quiet settle around me. Vera and Isolde hadn't called. Not once. Not a letter. Not even a petty email. I didn't expect one. They weren't prosecuted, technically, but they were finished all the same. Their circles grew smaller. Their invitations stopped arriving. Their names stopped getting whispered with admiration and started getting whispered with pity. Cassian kept in touch. Not often, but just enough. He'd moved out of state, started a new job. Said he needed distance, too. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. It sighs. Quiet. But final. I remembered the girl I was, scrubbing dishes alone after every holiday meal, waiting to be seen, praying someone would say, "Sit, eat, you belong here." I remembered how long I waited. And now I belonged to myself. They said I was a stranger. Maybe I was. A stranger to their cruelty. A stranger to silence. And now, finally, a stranger to pain. Amaya's voice reached me from across the playground. "Mommy!" I stood, smiled, and walked toward her. Sometimes, family isn't who shares your blood, but who respects your boundaries. Marceline's story reminds us that silence in the face of cruelty isn't loyalty, it's surrender. But what happens when the person you trusted most becomes the reason you had to rebuild your life from scratch? Have you ever been treated like a stranger by your own family? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful family stories like this one.
Hello, my name is Vinitra, and my parents didn't even notice when I moved 3 states away. Not a call, not a question, nothing. They posted a family photo that week with the caption, "All of us together," and I wasn't in it. But that was just the surface. They sold off the land my grandmother left me, forged signatures, took out loans in my name, then called me, asking for help, like I owed them something. They thought I was still the quiet one, the good daughter, the shadow. But what happens when the shadow learns how to own the light? Would you stay silent? Or would you build something they couldn't ignore? Let me tell you what I did. I stood in front of the house with my hand halfway to the doorbell, wondering if the wood beneath the porch had always creaked that way, or if time had finally caught up to it. The paint was still chipped on the right side of the windowsill, the mailbox still tilted slightly to the left, but it didn't feel like mine anymore, or maybe it never had. I caught my reflection in the car window behind me. The woman staring back wore confidence like a coat, zipped to the neck, clean, composed. But under that, my fingers trembled just enough to betray me. I steadied my breath and rang the bell. The door opened slower than I remembered. Then came a face I once memorized without effort, my mother's. Her eyes scanned me like I was a saleswoman she didn't want to buy from. A beat passed. Then 2. "Sorry," she said, brushing a loose strand of gray behind her ear. "Who are you here to see?" It took me a second to answer, because I wasn't sure what was worse, the fact that she didn't recognize me, or the fact that she sounded completely genuine. "It's me," I said. "Vinitra." Her mouth parted just slightly. A moment of calculation flickered behind her eyes. Then the awkward, rehearsed kind of smile that people give to avoid admitting they're caught. Oh, right. "Of course," she murmured, but she didn't move to hug me, didn't even open the door all the way. I stepped in on my own. Inside, the house smelled of lemon polish and time. The hallway hadn't changed, but everything else had. The living room was rearranged. The couch was new. On the wall where my graduation photo used to hang was a framed print of my brother Darnell standing beside a city councilman, shaking hands like he had just solved world hunger. Above the mantel was a recent family photo. Everyone was there. Darnell, our sister, their spouses, a couple of cousins, even the dog. Not me. I walked into what used to be my bedroom. The walls were a pale beige now. My posters were gone. My bookshelf, the one my uncle built me when I was 10, replaced by a printer and filing cabinet. The room had been turned into a home office, efficient, quiet, and utterly indifferent. Later that evening, I checked into a modest motel on the edge of town. Lorraine had said there was no room left. "The house is full," she claimed, like it was a hotel she didn't manage. After a lukewarm shower and dinner from a vending machine, I lay on the bed and opened my phone. Scrolling felt like a habit I couldn't quit. That's when I saw it. A Facebook post from my sister. "Happy birthday, Mom. So lucky to have all of us here. Family complete." I stared at it for a long moment, waiting to feel something sharp, anger, hurt, anything. But all I felt was the weight of confirmation. I laughed, not loudly. The kind of laugh that barely escapes your nose. The kind of laugh you use when something is too cruel to cry over, but too familiar to fight. 18 months ago, I left this place, packed my bags, moved 3 states away, and never once got a call asking where I'd gone. I had convinced myself it was my silence that kept them distant. But the truth? They never noticed I was gone. I didn't sleep that night. The motel room clock blinked through the hours, but my eyes stayed open, trained on the ceiling. My mind wasn't spinning. It had settled. Still, something in me itched for answers I already knew. Just past sunrise, I got out of bed, pulled on a sweater, and sat on the floor with the duffel bag I hadn't unpacked. From the side pocket, I pulled out a small plastic sleeve. Inside were a few folded receipts and a greeting card with a sun-bleached cover, roses and gold script. To the woman who gave me life. I stared at the florist confirmation slip. 2 years ago, sent to this same address. The card had been written in my hand. To Mom. Thank you for everything you did when I didn't know how to say it. Love, V. The flowers were expensive. Back then, I'd just gotten my first major deal in Houston. I wanted to mark the moment with gratitude, even if no one asked for it, even if no one would say thanks back. Except they did. Just not to me. I remembered the post, clear as day. Thanks for the beautiful bouquet, sweetheart. You always know how to make me feel special. Love you, baby girl. Posted by my mother, tagged to my sister, captioned, From your favorite daughter. That day, I told myself it didn't matter, that she must have mixed them up. Maybe it was the delivery, maybe the florist got confused. But even then, part of me knew better. Now, sitting on a stained motel carpet, card still sealed in its original envelope, I knew exactly what had happened. She knew where those flowers came from. She just decided who they should have come from. Later that morning, after some dry motel toast and 2 cups of bitter coffee, I drove back to the house. I didn't call ahead. I didn't need permission. Nobody noticed when I was gone. Why would they care if I showed up? The driveway was empty. Good. Darnell's truck wasn't there. I pulled up quietly, parked behind the shed, and walked around to the garage. The side door was still sticky on the hinge, same as always. I jimmied it open, careful not to make too much noise. The garage hadn't changed. Dust thick enough to write your name in, the smell of old paint and rust. I wasn't there to look around. I had a purpose. In the far back corner was a stack of storage boxes. I recognized the handwriting on the labels. One read, Venitra, school stuff. I crouched and pulled it down, brushing away a dead spider from the corner. Inside were binders, notebooks, my high school yearbook. And beneath those, neatly placed in a manila envelope, was the letter. I knew it before I even opened the flap. The envelope was sealed, but warped. The edges were crumpled, the bottom corner chewed at, like it had been dragged around. Bits of dog hair clung to the paper. There were smudges, spots. It had clearly been shoved somewhere dirty, and it hadn't been opened. My handwriting was still on the front. For Mom, please read. I didn't open it either. I didn't need to. She never read it, never wanted to. She'd taken something I wrote in one of the hardest moments of my life, when I had just left college after a breakdown, when I was struggling to forgive her for the way she'd looked at me like I was disposable, and used it as lining for the dog bed. Probably thought it was trash. I stood up slowly, holding the letter in my hand. Then I placed it back inside the box, on top this time. Message received. I walked out without touching anything else. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry. Not then. Instead of heading back to the motel, I drove into town. There was a small cafe near the courthouse, the kind with sun-faded menus and chipped mugs. I ordered black coffee and a breakfast sandwich, then pulled out my laptop. I checked my calendar, my inbox, and opened a folder labeled Mid-South Acquisitions. Inside was the pending purchase file for several rural homes nearing foreclosure. One address caught my eye. My old house, the one I just walked out of. The final stage of acquisition was in 5 days. I stared at the file for a moment. There were no bells ringing in my head, no alarms, just a strange stillness. I didn't mark it for removal, didn't make any notes. I flagged it as internal interest, sensitive ownership confirmation pending, and closed the laptop. Then I picked up my coffee, took a sip, and leaned back in my chair. Let them keep thinking I came back because I missed them. Let them believe they still had control over what I knew, what I owned, what I wanted. Because truth was, they never saw me coming either. By the time Sunday rolled around, I had already made peace with what I wasn't going to hear. I didn't expect apologies. I didn't want explanations. I just needed to see it with my own eyes, to prove to myself that what I'd been avoiding all these years wasn't a misunderstanding. It was policy. I pulled into the driveway 5 minutes late on purpose. The family brunch was in full swing. Through the windows, I saw Darnell holding court at the head of the table like he was running for mayor. Laughter drifted out when I opened the front door. No one turned. The dining room smelled like bacon and cinnamon rolls. I stepped in slowly, scanning for an empty seat. There wasn't one. Every chair was taken, siblings, cousins, even someone's neighbor who wasn't even blood. I cleared my throat. Lorraine looked up, offered a polite nod like I was a last-minute guest at someone else's event. She didn't say, "Sit down." She didn't say, "We missed you." Darnell didn't even glance my way. A bar stool was tucked near the kitchen island. I carried it over, made space at the corner of the table, and sat with the same grace I'd learned in rooms where I wasn't invited. Plates were passed. Conversations flowed around me, never to me. I reached for eggs. The platter moved just as I did. I poured juice. No one asked if I wanted coffee. The silence wasn't loud, it was practiced. After a few minutes, Lorraine stood with a glass of orange juice, tapping it lightly with a spoon. All heads turned toward her. "I just want to take a moment," she began, "to honor the one who's been holding this family together." Her eyes landed on Darnell. "To the child who stayed, who took care of the family business when others wandered. Darnell, we're proud of you." There was clapping. Some stood and raised their glasses. I offered a smile. Not because I meant it, but because I'd learned how to wear one like armor. Then Uncle Morris turned to me. He tilted his head the way people do when they're trying to recall your name, but can't quite reach it. "You used to write little poems, didn't you?" he asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Back in school. That was your thing, right?" He chuckled before I could answer. "That's something, ain't it?" Someone laughed behind a napkin. Darnell looked right at me and grinned, the kind that doesn't hide its teeth. I excused myself after the meal. No one asked why. In the hallway, I passed the same photo that haunted me a few days ago. Darnell beside a politician. Handshakes, medals, captions. As I walked to the guest room where I was told I could rest for a bit, I noticed the cabinet door near the hall was slightly ajar. Something inside caught my eye. Curiosity didn't feel like revenge. It felt like survival. I stepped in, found a stack of legal folders, Lorraine's neat handwriting on each tab, tax records, medical bills, property deeds. One folder read, Granny Pearl, land title. I opened it carefully. Inside was the notarized deed from our grandmother's estate. The property had been split equally between her grandchildren, on paper once. Now it had a revised version, one name, Darnell's. I scanned the pages again to be sure. My name wasn't listed, not even as a witness. No letter, no call, no explanation. The signature from Granny Pearl looked digitized, stamped, dull. Darnell's signature was fresh, ink still crisp. I didn't take a picture. Didn't pocket anything. I just closed the folder, slid it back into the cabinet, and pulled the door shut. No slamming, no scenes. On my way out, I passed Lorraine in the hallway. She gave me a look that wasn't guilt, wasn't shame. It was emptiness. I nodded. She didn't ask me to stay longer. Back in my car, the air was warmer than I expected. I rolled the windows down halfway and sat still for a while. Years ago, my father stood at a family reunion and told a room full of people, "She's the delicate one. Emotional. Not cut out for big things. A burden, but she's ours." That was when I was 14. I thought I'd outgrown it. But now, older, wiser, more silent than ever, I realized they hadn't changed their minds. They'd just learned how to say it without saying it. Through chairs not pulled out, through signatures misplaced, through stories where I didn't exist. Some people inherit homes. Some inherit debt. Me? I inherited silence. The next few days passed in a blur of errands, small talk, and short drives that seemed longer than they used to. I moved through Clarksdale like a stranger playing a part she never auditioned for. I didn't wear grief on my sleeve. but I could feel it in my teeth. On Tuesday afternoon, I stopped by the farmer's market to pick up some peaches. I was scanning a box for the ripest ones when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Well, look who's back in town." I turned and saw Mrs. Carla, the neighbor who used to slip candy into my pockets when I was a kid. She looked older, of course, but still had that warmth in her voice that made you forget how cold the world could be. I gave her a polite smile. "Just for a little while?" She leaned in and gave my shoulder a squeeze. "I'm so glad your mama came through that gallbladder surgery okay. That was scary." The peach in my hand slipped slightly. I adjusted it without blinking. "Surgery?" I asked. Mrs. Carla blinked, confused. "Oh, you didn't know? She was in the hospital a few days ago. Out now, though. Thank the Lord." I nodded, managing to mumble something like, "Yeah, thank God," but the edges of my ears burned. After I left the market, I didn't drive back to the motel. I drove around, just aimless loops, stopped at a gas station, bought a bottle of water I didn't want, sat in the parking lot and stared at the steering wheel. They didn't forget to tell me. They chose not to. That evening, I got invited to Darnell's pre-engagement dinner. It wasn't a formal thing, just close friends and family, according to the message Lorraine forwarded to me, without a single greeting attached. I showed up on time, slipped in through the side door like a background actor who knows not to block the camera. The house was decorated with twinkle lights and photo frames lined up on side tables. Smiling faces. Matching t-shirts from vacations I wasn't invited to. After dinner plates had been cleared, everyone moved into the living room. Lorraine clicked the remote, and a slideshow lit up the flat screen. "Let's take a walk down memory lane," she announced with enthusiasm she never once used for anything involving me. Music played. The kind of sentimental background score that makes people tear up over nothing. Childhood photos, baseball games, dance recitals, first days of school, all edited into a clean, glowing montage. I waited, and never showed up. Even when they played old birthday videos, the camera angles were cropped. Tight frames. Faces turned just enough to cut me out, without making it obvious. When the slideshow ended, everyone clapped. Darnell kissed his fiancée on the cheek. Lorraine dabbed her eyes. I got up and walked to the porch. Outside, the air smelled like cut grass and charcoal. I pulled out my phone. No messages. I scrolled through old emails. The last one from Lorraine had been a forwarded electric bill. No greeting, no context. 2 years ago. Back inside, dessert was being passed around. Brownies and vanilla ice cream. I walked toward the table, but stopped halfway. The chair I'd been sitting in earlier was gone. Someone had taken it, probably to the other room. No one noticed. I stood for a moment, then walked into the kitchen, fixed a plate, and sat by the back door. No one said a word. I didn't expect them to. For years, I thought the worst thing they could do was forget me. I was wrong. The worst thing was knowing they remembered and erased me anyway. I left the house that night without saying goodbye. No one followed me. No one asked if I made it back to the motel. It was almost funny, how easy it had become for them to treat me like a loose thread no one wanted to pull. 2 nights later, around 10:30, my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. It was local. I hesitated, then picked up. "Hello?" A familiar voice answered, warm in tone but tight at the edges. "Hi, sweetheart, it's Mom." She said it like we'd spoken yesterday. Like we shared recipes or traded weekend plans. "I hope I didn't wake you. I know it's late, but your brother's in a bit of a bind with the mortgage. Nothing catastrophic, just complicated." She forced a chuckle. "He's just stretched thin. The market's so unpredictable these days." I said nothing. "We were wondering," she continued, "if maybe your boss might be willing to help out. Just a short-term thing. Bridge loan, strictly professional. You know how folks talk. We can't have people thinking we can't keep up." It was surreal. She was asking me to tap into a relationship she assumed I had, for a favor she framed as saving the family's name. I stayed quiet, long enough for her to speak again. "Venitra, you there?" still silent. Well, anyway, think about it, okay? It would mean a lot to Darnell, and to me. She didn't say, I miss you. She didn't ask how I was. She just wanted access, through a boss I supposedly worked under. I hung up without answering. The next afternoon, I stopped for gas on the way back from a property inspection. As I filled my tank, Mr. Franklin shuffled over from the pump across the lot. He still wore the same flannel cap and walked with a limp from his army years. Didn't expect to see you back in these parts, he said, nodding. Didn't expect to be back, I replied. He looked at me for a moment, then leaned in slightly. I know it ain't my place, but I figured you ought to know. Your mama and Darnell are about to lose the house. They borrowed heavy, put everything under his name. I stared at him. He kept talking, softer now. Bank already turned him down. They're scrambling. Don't want nobody to find out. My hands were still on the pump handle, but my body had gone still. They're not coming to you because you're family, he said. They're coming because they're out of options. That night, I sat in a quiet booth at a small cafe near downtown. Laptop open, documents pulled up. The address of the house I grew up in was highlighted in yellow. Pending foreclosure. Purchase negotiations already in progress. I didn't need to ask who was handling the file. I was. My name sat at the top of the acquisition paperwork, co-owner of the firm currently working to finalize the buy. I flagged the file for internal handling, not to stop it, to protect it, from interference, from family, from sentiment. A few minutes later, I picked up my phone and called the number Lorraine had used. She answered on the first ring. Venitra? Mom, you asked if my boss could help with Darnell's mortgage, I said flatly. She hesitated. Yes. Did you talk to him? I didn't give her the chance to keep spinning. I am the boss. Silence. I don't approve financial rescues for people who forget I exist until they're underwater. I could hear her breathe in sharply. She tried to recover. That's not fair, baby. You know how family works. Sometimes we fall apart, but we're still blood. Ask Darnell, I said, my voice calm. He's got all the titles, doesn't he? There was a soft gasp, then a sniffle. She was trying not to cry, or trying to make sure I heard her doing it, but I didn't raise my voice. I didn't soften my tone. I've been invisible long enough, I said. Let's keep it consistent. Then I hung up. For a moment, I just sat there. The hum of the fridge behind the counter filled the space around me. The waitress brought a refill without asking. I stirred my coffee slowly. The empire they ignored was about to own the house they worshipped. The next morning, I got a text from Lorraine. Can you swing by the house? Just want to talk. Nothing heavy. She even added a smiley face. I stared at it for a minute, then replied, Sure, 2 o'clock. Before heading over, I stopped at a cafe and picked up an iced tea, then made one more stop, at the firm's satellite office downtown. I asked Hannah, one of my legal advisors, to come along. I didn't tell her why, just asked if she could meet me at the gas station 2 blocks from the house and wait in the car. Just in case. She didn't ask questions. That's why I trusted her. At 2:05, I pulled up the gravel driveway, parked, and walked up to the porch, like I wasn't walking into a setup. Lorraine met me at the door with a practiced smile and a plate of lemon cookies. Darnell's here too, she said, as if that were normal. Just a quick thing to go over. He was already at the kitchen table, papers laid out, pen clipped neatly to the top. Lorraine sat next to him. The plate of cookies stayed untouched. Darnell gestured to the stack. It's just a signature. Mom's credit is shot, and the bank won't give her the time of day without a cosigner. I looked down at the document. Pages and pages of dense legal text, but one thing stood out in bold, underlined font. Joint responsibility. All financial burden shared equally by signing parties. No clause for removal. He smiled the way people do when they think they've rehearsed their part well. Come on, he said. No risk to you. You've got the money. You don't even need to do anything. Just sign so we can keep the house. Lorraine chimed in softly. You owe this family something, don't you? I pulled out my bag, unzipped the side pocket, and set a small digital recorder on the table. Would you mind repeating that? They both froze. Darnell's mouth opened, but no words came. Lorraine's smile faded. I'm going to take this home, I said calmly, collecting the papers. And have my legal team look it over, Darnell scoffed. Seriously? You're dragging lawyers into this? You did, I replied, when you brought me into something that's already falling apart. I stood up. Lorraine reached out gently. Venitra, this is your family. We're not trying to trap you, just asking for help. I met her eyes. You're asking for access. That's not the same thing. On the way back, I stopped by a diner for a late lunch. It was the kind of place where everyone knew someone's aunt or cousin, where gossip passed like condiments across the table. I sat at the counter and ordered coffee. 10 minutes later, someone tapped my shoulder. It was Denise Chapman. We'd gone to school together, different circles, but still familiar. She leaned in like we were best friends. I heard you're still mad. I turned slowly. Darnell says you're freezing them out, just letting them sink, that you like watching it happen. I didn't blink. You'd be amazed how loud guilt sounds when it's dressed up as duty. She opened her mouth, thought better of it, and left. Back in my car, I laid the contract out across the passenger seat and read every word. Hidden beneath the jargon and fine print was a clear trap, one I was expected to walk into with my eyes closed. The agreement didn't protect me. It exposed me. If Darnell missed a payment, which he would, I'd be liable for the full amount. And there was no clause to opt out. It was signed by him, prepared by his friend's firm, already notarized. I folded the papers neatly, tore the corner just slightly, slid them into an envelope, and attached a sticky note. This is the last time you mistake silence for compliance. That evening, just as I was sorting through emails at the motel, my phone buzzed again. Voicemail from Lorraine. Her voice, no longer warm. I raised you better than this. I don't know who you've become, but people are talking. People are asking why you're acting so cold. You're embarrassing this family. I hit play again, then forwarded the file to Hannah. After a pause, I recorded my response. You didn't raise me. You raised an image, a story, something you could point to in public. But that version of me died the day you taught me love was conditional. I'm not here to perform anymore. I'm not here to be silent for your comfort. I hit send, and for the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. They thought I'd fold like before, but this time, I brought paper that bites back. The courthouse wasn't grand, just tired. Beige carpet, flickering fluorescent lights, and a podium with a microphone that squeaked every time someone adjusted it. I sat in the back row while names were called. Most people were here to dispute fines, finalize property sales, settle debts they couldn't carry anymore. When they called the Henderson case, I stood. I didn't rush. Inside the small hearing room, Darnell was already seated at the front table, Lorraine beside him, flipping nervously through paperwork. A few locals filled the back, probably city staff and a couple of reporters fishing for small-town drama. When I walked in, I didn't look at either of them. I walked straight to the desk and handed over the final signed transfer documents. My name, my firm, everything in order. The clerk gave a brief nod and announced, "Acquisition confirmed, effective immediately." Whispers followed like smoke. Darnell leaned toward Lorraine, muttering, "Bet it's one of those out-of-state developers. Probably gonna tear it all down." Then the back door opened again. This time, it was me who stepped through, dressed in navy, clipboard in hand, no apology in my stride. Silence. The kind that doesn't need shushing. I walked past the folding chairs, past the city seal on the wall, and took my place at the other table. The clerk cleared his throat. Just to clarify for the record, Miss Venitra Henderson holds 61% ownership in the purchasing entity and has acted as the primary decision-maker in this acquisition. Lorraine's eyes widened. Darnell froze. The banker beside them stammered. "She's had power of attorney on this deal since last quarter," I finished for him. without looking away from the panel. Darnell blinked hard. "You went behind our backs." "No," I said. "I went through the front door. You just weren't watching." I turned toward the council. "This isn't a family dispute. This is a business conclusion." Lorraine stood abruptly. "How could you do this? This house is your legacy, too." I pulled a folder from my bag and opened it. Inside were printouts, forged applications, digitally altered email threads, loan documents submitted with my name, but not my hand. "This," I said, holding up a sheet, "is the application Darnell submitted 3 years ago using my identity as collateral." I passed another page across the table. "And this is the timeline of wire transfers, accounts opened using my SSN, addresses tied to my name, but listed as authorized user, D. Henderson." A low gasp rippled through the back row. I didn't raise my voice. "You used me, repeatedly, but I made sure every misuse had a breadcrumb, and now those breadcrumbs lead here." Darnell started to speak, then stopped. His hand trembled as he slid it off the table. One of the council members asked, "Miss Henderson, do you intend to press charges?" I looked at Darnell for the first time. "Not yet, but I've started the clock." Outside, the sun was merciless. Reporters swarmed the steps like bees to a cracked jar of honey. "Is it true you just reclaimed your childhood home? Are you planning to evict your own family? Is this about revenge?" I didn't answer any of them. I stepped into the car where Hannah waited in the front seat, files already packed away in the back. She looked over her glasses. "Well?" I exhaled slowly. "It's done." "And what happens now?" "They live with it," I said, "with the silence, the kind I lived in for 30 years. Behind us, Lorraine sat on the edge of the sidewalk, head in her hands. Darnell paced angrily, trying to talk on his phone, but no one was picking up. As we pulled away, I didn't feel relief. Not victory either, just weight shifting. I didn't have to destroy them. I just let the truth finish what they started. The following week, I was back in Houston, buried in zoning files and back-to-back meetings, trying to push aside the shadow that Clarksdale had left trailing behind me. I didn't say anything about what had happened in the courthouse, not the full version, at least. The ones who needed to know already did. The rest? They'd hear it eventually, the same way I always had. Fragmented, distorted, softened by distance and time, until it no longer resembled truth, only rumor. On Thursday morning, just after 9, the front desk buzzed up to the office. Monica answered, then knocked on my door a moment later, holding a padded manila envelope with no postage, no return address, just hand-delivered, anonymous. I paused my notes on a zoning revision for a commercial lot in Midtown and took the envelope. It was thin but dense, the kind of weight that meant trouble, or at least something meant to stir it. Inside was a set of photocopied documents, neatly stapled. At the top, bold lettering stamped across the first page. Property transfer, Pearl Henderson Estate. My eyes stopped moving. I knew immediately what it was, even before I flipped past the title page. My grandmother's name, Pearl Henderson, appeared on the signature line, but the signature below it wasn't hers, not even close. Her handwriting had always been a little wild, like her voice, loud and swinging with mood. This was tidy, mechanical, a forgery done by someone who had watched her sign checks but never knew her wrist. I turned to the notarization page. The date, 5 years ago. The notary? A firm out of Clarksdale that didn't even exist anymore. Shut down, disgraced, dead ends, all of it. And then came the name that kept appearing like a bad habit. Darnell, once as executor, once as witness, and again as heir. I closed the folder and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. My stomach wasn't tight with shock. That had passed years ago. What I felt was the cold weight of inevitability. While I'd been rebuilding from scratch, scraping together some version of normal 3 states away, they'd been busy rewriting the story. Without me. Without truth. I called Hannah. Get this submitted to probate, I told her. Quietly, no press, no announcements. I'll file it before end of day, she said. Do you want to be present at the hearing? I'll be there, alone. The court date came quickly. Tuesday morning. The courthouse smelled like dust and old paperwork. I showed up early. No family, no bystanders. Just me, Hannah in a charcoal suit, and a judge who looked like he'd seen too many versions of this same story. Hannah handled everything. She was clinical but compelling, methodical as she laid out evidence like a quiet war. She showed digital timelines, voice recordings, sworn affidavits from people who remembered Pearl's voice in those last years. People who remembered who was really there and who wasn't. People who hadn't forgotten what family meant, even if family had forgotten them. There were no objections, no lawyers standing up to argue. No one came to contest it. 15 minutes later, the judge signed off. The documents were declared invalid. The land, nearly 20 acres of hardwood and memory, was legally and irrevocably mine. Always had been, by birth and by blood. The forged transfer was nullified, erased from record like it had never existed. That night, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, lights off except for one lamp. I pulled out an old leather-bound journal from a drawer I hadn't opened in years. Between two dog-eared pages, there was a letter, yellowed at the edges, folded 3 times, still unmailed. It began, "Dear Mom, I don't know how to say this without sounding ungrateful, but..." I read it slowly, as if reading someone else's handwriting. And maybe I was. The person who wrote that letter was younger, more hopeful. They believed in reconciliation, in clarity, in second chances. It wasn't a bad letter. If anything, it was kind. Too kind. But it didn't belong anymore. Not to me. Not to the life I'd built since. I tore it down the fold lines, piece by piece. Not in anger. Just with finality. There are some truths that outlive their purpose. Some stories you outgrow. The next morning, I drafted a new letter. It didn't start with "Dear," no greeting, no farewell. Just a plain, unvarnished message. You may continue to reside on the property until your affairs are settled. I will not evict you. I will not return. This is not an act of punishment. It is a boundary, for your dignity and for mine. No signature, just initials, no address, just a P.O. box. I slipped it into an envelope and dropped it in the mailbox downstairs, then walked a block and a half to a quiet cafe, ordered coffee, sat by the window, and watched Houston start its day. That evening, I was back on the highway. The Clarksdale exit came up on my right. Familiar green signs, same mile markers, same pull. But I didn't slow down. I didn't look. My hands stayed steady on the wheel, the skyline ahead glowing like a promise I could finally believe in. In the rearview mirror, I saw nothing I needed to return to. Forgiveness isn't a performance, and silence doesn't always mean surrender. Sometimes it means freedom. Sometimes it's both. It had rained the night before, one of those quiet storms that doesn't announce itself with thunder, just slips in and rearranges the air. The next morning, everything outside my window looked sharper, like the skyline had been freshly outlined. I brewed coffee and stood barefoot on my balcony, watching the sun push through the clouds. There was no sense of conclusion, just space, breathing room. Later that day, I met my team at a duplex in East Austin, newly renovated. Nothing grand, just clean lines, soft yellow paint, a pair of modest porches. The kind of home that doesn't boast, but offers safety. I walked through the rooms slowly, hand brushing over walls, fingertips grazing windowsills. It wasn't mine in the way Clarksdale was mine. It was mine in a better way. Not inherited, not stolen back. Built. Chosen. My assistant, Tasha, stood in the hallway, iPad in hand. "We're good to sign off," she said. "Want me to finalize the paperwork with the foundation?" I nodded. She paused. "Why this one, though? We've passed on bigger properties." I looked around one last time. "Because it's not about square footage. It's about message. She tilted her head. What message? That no one should have to earn the right to be seen. That afternoon, I returned to the office. There was a missed call on my phone. Clarksdale area code. No voicemail, just a call that rang once and hung up. I didn't call back. I didn't need to wonder who it was. Some bridges don't need burning. They just don't lead anywhere anymore. I hit delete and tucked the phone away. That night, I hosted dinner at my house. My house. No last-minute invitations, no passive-aggressive questions about seating charts. Just my team, a few close friends, and my mentor, Mrs. Pearson, who'd once told me, sometimes family isn't blood. It's who shows up when your name isn't trending. We had gumbo and cornbread. Someone brought peach cobbler from a bakery downtown. There was music, soft Motown in the background, and conversation that didn't circle around survival or obligation. Midway through the evening, I excused myself to the hallway. On the wall hung a photo, the day we opened our first office. I was in the center, flanked by Hannah and Tasha, everyone grinning, exhausted and proud. That picture used to make me ache. Now it felt like proof. A guest wandered over, a friend of a friend. He pointed to the photo and said, "You've built something incredible. Does your family know?" I smiled. "They'll hear about it eventually, but it's not for them." He looked puzzled, then nodded. Before everyone left, I handed out thank you notes. Not because it was expected, but because I wanted to. No strings, no debts, just appreciation. After the dishes were cleared and the last hugs exchanged, I sat alone with a cup of tea and my journal. I hadn't written in it since I tore up that letter, but tonight felt like it needed marking. I wrote slowly, "You don't win by being invited back. You win by realizing you never needed to audition in the first place. You win by knowing you're enough, even when no one claps." I closed the journal, set it beside the lamp, and walked to the balcony again. The storm had passed. The wind had quieted. My breath felt steady in my chest. They thought I was a silence they could manage. But this empire? It's not made of walls or land. It's made of the woman they never saw coming. Hi there, I'm Maribel. My parents gave away the house I grew up in, to my sister. Then they moved me into the garage, like some forgotten storage box they didn't want to throw away just yet. They told themselves it was temporary. But then came the guest lists I wasn't on, the family photos without me, the business loan I never agreed to. But they used the house to get it. Was it just thoughtlessness, or something far worse? And what happened when I finally made one call? Let me tell you what they never expected I'd do next. I pulled into the driveway just after noon. The gravel under my tires crackled like it didn't recognize me. The house hadn't changed much on the outside. Same porch swing, same worn shutters. But I knew better than to think it was the same house I left years ago. Familiarity, I've learned, is not the same thing as belonging. Clara, my mother, stepped out onto the porch with a folded dish towel in her hand. She offered me a smile that was polite, not warm. She didn't hug me, just nodded like we were neighbors and said, "You'll be in the den for now. Lorene's using the guest room with the kids." I didn't ask why. I'd already packed with the assumption I wouldn't be truly welcome. I walked past her, wheeling the single suitcase I'd brought with me, not because I planned to travel light, but because I didn't expect to stay long. Inside, the house smelled like citrus cleaning spray and lavender plug-ins. Clara hated open windows, said fresh air dragged in dust. I took a deep breath anyway, hoping something of my childhood would drift through. It didn't. The den still had the same green recliner my father loved, but the couch had been replaced with a pull-out. No photos, no bookshelves, no remnants of who I was. She gestured toward it and said, "The sheets are clean. There's a fan in the corner if you get warm." I thanked her and sat down, listening to the distant hum of a dryer somewhere. No one else came to greet me. Not my father, not Lorene, not even the kids I'd seen in family holiday cards. I assumed they were upstairs. Or maybe not. Maybe I'd stopped being family the minute I stepped away years ago. After I set my bag down, I asked, "Is my old room still there?" My voice cracked a little. but I hoped she didn't catch it. Clara tilted her head. Oh, we converted it. Lorene needed space for her yoga stuff and storage for the kids' clothes. You understand, right? I nodded. That was always the rule in this house. You nod. You don't ask again. You make yourself smaller so others can stretch their legs. Still, I walked down the hallway. My hand grazed the frame of the door that used to be mine. The paint was newer, the smell synthetic. I opened it. The room was unrecognizable. A rubber mat covered the hardwood floor I used to slide across in socks. Boxes lined the walls, neatly labeled Lorene, Summer, Kids, Toys, Workout Bands. Where my desk had been, there was now a standing shelf of aromatherapy diffusers and dumbbells. The bookshelf my grandfather built when I was 10 was gone. When I asked about it, Clara said, "We donated it. No one was using it anymore." I wanted to say it wasn't just a bookshelf. It was a piece of memory, soaked in childhood sleepovers and late-night journal entries. But I stayed silent. My silence was easier for them to manage. Dinner that night was chili from a crock pot. We sat around the table, me, Clara, Harland, and Lorene, who arrived 10 minutes late in yoga pants and a blazer. She talked about expanding her wellness brand, casually mentioning a new location in Portland. She looked at me once and said, "You'll feel better now that you're back to simplicity. There's something freeing about not having to manage everything, isn't there?" I didn't respond. Harlan spooned more chili into his bowl and said nothing. I couldn't tell if that was his way of keeping peace or avoiding discomfort. Maybe both. Lorene kept going. "Resetting can be such a gift. You're lucky, really. Not everyone gets the chance to rebuild." It wasn't sarcasm. That's what made it worse. After the dishes were cleared, I sat on the back steps by myself. The night air was cool, soft against my cheeks. Somewhere inside, Lorene's kids giggled over something on a screen. Clara vacuumed upstairs, her rhythm mechanical. Harland watched the news in his recliner, volume turned low. No one came out. No one asked how I was adjusting. No one offered a blanket. Later, when I lay down on the pullout, the mattress creaked under me. The ceiling fan above spun with a lazy rhythm, the kind that doesn't cool, just moves air from corner to corner. I stared at the ceiling for a long time. My bag sat unpacked. There wasn't really a drawer to use anyway. From the hallway, I heard Lorene's laugh echo. Sharp, vibrant, full of life. I turned to face the wall and whispered, more to myself than anyone else. I came home. And somehow, I'm the one who doesn't belong. I didn't expect a red carpet, but I didn't think I'd be sent to the garage either. It was just after 7 the next morning when Clara tapped gently on the den door. I was already awake, had been for a while. The ceiling fan had done little through the night besides shuffle around the warm air, and I'd spent most of it staring into the dark, wondering when I'd started being treated like a guest in my own family. Clara didn't come all the way in. She stayed in the doorway like she was checking in on a sleeping child. "Lorene didn't sleep well," she said, her voice coated in that soft, well-practiced maternal tone she used when she didn't want to sound like she was giving orders. You know how she gets when she's this far along. I sat up slowly, rubbing my shoulder where the metal bar under the mattress had left its mark. "Is everything all right?" "We were thinking," she said, eyes drifting anywhere but mine. "Just for now, you could move into the garage. It's quieter, more private. You'd have your own space. Lorene really needs rest." "Isn't that where we keep the old garden tools and the paint cans?" I asked, trying to smile so it wouldn't come off as a protest. She gave a shrug, half nod. "We moved most of it. It's tidy now. It'll be fine. There's a little heater, and I put some shelves up for you." There was no discussion, just the kind of statement framed as a favor to me, but clearly done to make someone else more comfortable. I didn't push back. I just nodded and got up to pack the few things I'd unpacked the night before. The garage door was already open when I stepped out. Morning air carried the smell of damp leaves and fertilizer. A twin-sized cot sat against the back wall, next to a small plastic dresser, and a lamp that looked like it had been pulled from a yard sale. A single extension cord snaked its way across the concrete to power the lamp and a humming space heater. The window near the ceiling didn't open. There was no insulation, just drywall that still showed patches from when my father had tried to hang shelves and given up halfway. I set my bag down and sat on the cot. The springs let out a sound that reminded me of the creaky swing set we'd had as kids, the one that had been taken down the year Lorene went to college. My name had never been carved into that frame either. I stayed there most of the day. No one checked in. No one offered help setting things up. Around 5, I heard footsteps on the gravel outside. I straightened up a little, hoping it might be someone coming to talk. Instead, Lorene's friend appeared at the side door, holding a bag of pastel-colored gift wrap. She looked inside and blinked when she saw me folding a basket of laundry. "Oh, sorry, I thought this was the laundry room. Are you the nanny?" Or... Before I could say a word, Lorene came up behind her. "She's just helping out for a while," she said with a practiced smile. No correction. No, that's my sister. Just a gentle, dismissive cover story to explain away my existence. I didn't correct her either. I just nodded once and kept folding the same towel I'd already refolded twice. The friend gave a quick, awkward smile and disappeared inside with the bag. Lorene didn't say anything else. She just followed her in, chatting about some new product line and a podcast interview. That evening, I made myself a sandwich in the kitchen, careful not to use the good dishes. Clara passed behind me at one point and said, "There's leftover quiche in the fridge." "I'm fine," I replied. I didn't want a favor. I wanted a place. Back in the garage, I sat on the edge of the cot, chewing slowly. The heater rattled and groaned like it might give out at any minute. A raccoon rustled through the trash outside, its claws scraping the plastic lid of the bin. When I finished eating, I pulled a dusty photo album from the plastic bin I'd brought with me. The pages stuck a little, the plastic yellowed from age. There I was, on the edge of the family vacation photo in Yosemite, half turned and half out of frame. At my high school graduation, standing behind Lorene, who was front and center with both parents' arms around her. Even in the Christmas photo, I was off to the side, cropped in like a placeholder. They didn't need to erase me. They'd already edited me out. I stayed up longer than I should have that night, staring at the warped ceiling of the garage, trying not to think. But when the thoughts come quietly, they settle deep. By morning, I'd told myself to let it go, that this was temporary, that I was just overreacting. But temporary has a way of stretching itself thin until it covers a whole season. 3 days later, Clara decided to throw a small dinner gathering. She called it a family appreciation night, something to celebrate Lorene's pregnancy and Harland stepping away from full-time work. It was nothing fancy. Some catered platters, paper lanterns strung across the back patio, a few folks from town invited over. I assumed I'd help with setup, cleanup, and smile politely, like usual. That afternoon, I laid out forks and napkins on the long table in the backyard, careful to keep the spacing even. I heard them inside rehearsing. Lorene had written something she wanted to say after dinner. A few heartfelt words, she called it. When the guests arrived, I didn't recognize most of them. Church friends, Lorene's business contacts, one of Harlan's old buddies from the construction firm. No one looked twice at me. I stayed in motion, refilling water pitchers, tossing salad, gathering empty glasses. After dessert, Clara stood up and tapped her wine glass with a spoon. "We're so grateful to have everyone here tonight. This family's been through a lot, and we're blessed to have people around us who've lifted us through it." She smiled at Lorene, who rose with a note card in her hand. Her voice was confident, clear. She looked around the table and began. "To the people who've stood by us, held this house together, who raised me, guided me, and believed in me." The words floated, wrapped in her charm, her timing perfect. She thanked their mother for her endless support. She praised Harland for his steady guidance. She even mentioned a few community members by name for being second families when things got hard. Not once did my name leave her lips. I'd driven Clara to her physical therapy appointments twice a week for months. I'd scrubbed the floor when Harland was sick and vomiting in the hallway. I'd cleaned up the backyard before the guests arrived, and I was invisible. When she finished, the table applauded. I kept clapping just a second longer than I needed to, just enough to keep my hands moving while I blinked a little faster. I glanced around. Odessa hadn't been invited. If she had, she would have caught it. She always saw what others pretended not to. After the last guests left and Clara headed to the kitchen with Lorene to put leftovers away, I wandered down the hallway. I didn't really know why. Maybe just to be somewhere quiet. I ended up in the main corridor where the family wall used to be. They'd redone it. The photos were all new, clean frames, matching colors, symmetrical arrangement. Lorene's wedding portrait took center position. On either side, pictures of her children. Harland and Clara's anniversary photo, one of Harland with Lorene at a local ribbon-cutting ceremony. A shot of Lorene's husband holding their youngest near a pumpkin patch. Not a single picture of me. Not even the one from high school graduation that used to hang by the thermostat. That frame now held a close-up of Lorene's daughter wearing oversized sunglasses. I leaned in, half hoping I'd just missed myself somewhere, even in the background. I hadn't. My image, my presence, was gone. And I realized it wasn't an oversight. It was an edit. Back in the garage, I changed into an old sweatshirt and sat on the cot, the space heater rumbling in the corner. I wrapped the sleeves around my waist and stared at the wall. I thought about every errand, every load of laundry, every dinner I cooked without being asked. Then I remembered something Lorene used to say in high school when she got caught lying. You can't blame people for telling a cleaner version of the truth. It's just better that way. I guess she still believed that. I reached for the photo album again, but paused. Instead, I opened the bottom drawer of the plastic dresser and pulled out a frame I hadn't touched since I moved in. It was a picture of me in 5th grade, standing beside Grandma Ruth at the local fall fair. We were both laughing. My hair was wild, hers was in a tight bun, and we were holding matching caramel apples. It was the one photo where I was centered, arms around someone who actually saw me. I wrapped the frame in a scarf and tucked it into my bag. If I didn't exist in their version of the story, maybe it was time I wrote my own. The next morning, I left early. I didn't wait for anyone to ask where I was going. I slipped out through the side door with a scarf wrapped around my neck and my hands stuffed deep in my coat pockets. The sun hadn't fully come up yet, and the grass was still wet from the sprinklers. It was cold enough to see my breath, but I welcomed the quiet. I walked the length of the neighborhood twice, circling back only when I figured they'd all be busy with their routines. Lorene on a client call, Clara planning dinner, Harland tinkering in the shed like always. I needed space before I could go back into that house. When I returned, I entered through the garage, took off my coat, and walked into the kitchen to rinse out my thermos. Lorene's son, Mason, was standing near the counter with another boy around his age, probably a school friend. They were eating crackers and giggling over something on his phone. The other boy looked up at me first. Then Mason followed his gaze and pointed, like he was stating a fact. That's the lady who lives in the garage. The other kid blinked. Is she like your grandma or something? Mason shook his head. Nah, she's not family. Right, Mom? Lorene had just stepped into the room, holding a bag of folded towels. She didn't look up. She didn't say anything to correct them. She smiled, tight, polite, and changed the subject entirely. Why don't you two go outside and play before it gets too hot? They ran off laughing, and I stood there, still holding the thermos under the faucet. The water had started to overflow. I turned it off quietly, set the cup aside, and walked back out to the garage before anyone could ask how I felt about being referred to, like I was a stray cat. That's how stories are written in families like mine. Casually, out loud, and left uncorrected. I spent the rest of the day avoiding eye contact. I stayed busy, organized a few of my old files, wrote some notes, took a long walk down to the park, and sat on a bench for an hour doing nothing in particular. It wasn't about hiding, it was about staying out of the way. But after dinner, Clara caught me in the hallway. I'd passed on eating with them, claiming I had a headache. She asked, "You're okay out there in the garage, aren't you?" I gave her a small smile. "It's fine." She hesitated. "Your sister's been under a lot of stress. The business, the baby. She's really stepped up for this family." There it was. I asked softly, "And I haven't?" Clara looked away. She's taken on so much. She's the one carrying this family right now." I waited, for anything else, for a single word of recognition. For her to remember the drives to doctor's appointments, the nights I stayed up with her while she had panic attacks during Harlan's surgery, the meals I cooked, the bills I paid when they were behind on utilities last year. She didn't say any of that. She just sighed and walked away. I stood there for a while, long after the conversation had ended, watching the light under the bathroom door flicker from someone inside. My feet hurt, my chest felt heavy, but my head was clear. They'd already made up their minds. I didn't argue, I didn't beg. I started walking more. Every afternoon, I'd grab my shoes and just go. No explanation, no return time. I stopped replying to Lorene's texts when she asked me to pick up milk or grab the mail. I didn't stop helping. I just stopped being available on command. At meals, I kept my earbuds in and nodded when spoken to. If Harlan asked about the heater, I told him it worked fine. If Clara asked if I wanted leftovers, I told her no, thank you. I wasn't angry in a loud way. I just started pulling myself out of the scenes they didn't realize I'd never belonged in. One evening, I sat on the back porch after they'd all gone to bed. I opened an old notebook I hadn't touched in years. The paper smelled faintly of cedar and coffee. I flipped to a clean page and began to write. It wasn't poetry or anything elegant, just pieces of thoughts. I wrote, "If I don't belong to them, maybe I belong to the part of myself I forgot to defend." It was the first sentence I'd written for myself in a long time. Later that night, lying on the cot with the hum of the heater keeping rhythm, I opened the notebook again. I only wrote one more line, but I pressed the pen down hard enough that it almost tore the page. "If you keep cutting me out, don't be surprised when I stop bleeding." The next morning came heavy, like the air was trying to hold me in place. I moved slower than usual, not out of tiredness, but out of deliberation. Every step felt measured. I made myself a mug of coffee in the kitchen before anyone else was up, drinking it in silence with my back to the window. I knew about the baby shower before they said a word. Clara had left the invitation list on the counter next to a stack of envelopes. I wasn't on it. Neither was Odessa. I didn't say anything when I saw it. I just read it once, set it down, and rinsed out my cup. The day of the shower arrived like any other, but the energy inside the house was different, brighter, buzzier. Lorene's friends showed up in sundresses and heels, carrying pastel gift bags and store-bought cupcakes stacked in careful towers. Harlan grilled. Clara fussed with tablecloths. No one asked me to help, but I still refilled the lemonade and set out extra forks. I wasn't invisible that day. I was background, the kind of presence you see out of the corner of your eye and choose not to acknowledge because it's easier that way. I stayed mostly in the hallway, coming and going through the side entrance, making myself small, but that didn't shield me from what I heard. One woman, probably one of Lorene's colleagues, stepped into the hallway with her phone out, snapping photos of the setup. "Lorene!" she called out with a grin. "This guest room is better decorated than most hotels I've stayed in." Lorene laughed, loud enough for the entire kitchen to hear. "Oh, we keep the garage for special guests," she said, pausing just long enough to let it land. "Like my sister." The room roared. Light-hearted laughter bounced off the walls like a tennis ball no one wanted to catch. I froze. I wasn't shocked. Not really. What stunned me was how smooth it came out of her mouth. How easily she turned me into a punchline for people who didn't even know my name. I didn't say anything. I didn't make a scene. I walked into the garage, grabbed my coat, and left. No slamming doors, no slammed words. I didn't come back until dusk. By then, the backyard lights were dimmed. The music had been turned off. Paper plates littered the patio table. Clara was inside wiping down counters. Lorene was upstairs. Harlan sat in his chair, TV flickering across his face. I stood in the garage, door still cracked open behind me, staring at the string of lights above the lawn. The same ones we used to hang for 4th of July. I used to think they made the house look magical. Now they just made it look staged. Later that night, I called Clara and Harlan into the kitchen. They came eventually. I didn't sit. I didn't offer coffee or soften my tone. "I've been quiet for too long," I began. "That ends tonight." They looked at each other, then at me. "I live in the garage," I said. "I get left out of family gatherings. I watch you hang pictures of everyone but me. I hear you joke about where I sleep. And I let it slide, again and again, because I kept telling myself maybe you didn't mean it." I paused, then continued. "But you do mean it. You meant all of it. And I'm done pretending otherwise." Harlan scoffed. "You're lucky we let you stay at all." Clara's eyes widened, but she didn't say anything. "This house doesn't belong to you anymore," he added flatly. "That was decided a long time ago." I nodded once. "I know." From the hallway, Lorene stood halfway down the stairs, arms crossed, watching like she was evaluating a performance. I looked her in the eye, then turned back to my parents. "You've made it clear I don't belong here," I said. "But just so we're all clear, I'm not going to sit in the corner anymore and play dumb while you erase me." No one responded, no apologies, no arguments, just the kind of silence that confirms everything you already knew. That night, I pulled out my phone and took photos. Quietly, without fanfare. I documented every item in the house that used to be mine. The quilt Grandma Ruth had sewn by hand, now folded over the back of Lorene's couch. A framed certificate I received in high school, half buried in a utility drawer next to some expired batteries. Even the ceramic figurine I'd painted as a kid, now tucked behind a row of essential oil bottles in the bathroom. I wasn't doing it out of spite. I was collecting what little proof remained that I'd once had a place here. I opened a folder on my phone and titled it, "Proof I Existed." Before I went to bed, I gathered some of my old paperwork and began organizing it on the fold-out table in the garage. Tax documents, school records, even receipts from bills I'd paid on the house years ago. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but something told me I'd need these soon. I zipped everything into a small file bag and slid it under the cot. Then I stepped outside and stood on the driveway, facing the house. Every light inside was on. People only leave every light on when they want a place to look warm, or when they're trying to blind themselves to what they don't want to see. "If this place isn't mine," I whispered to no one, "then they shouldn't be using pieces of me to decorate it." The wind had picked up overnight, scattering pine needles across the driveway by the time I stepped outside the next morning. I'd barely slept, but I wasn't tired. Something in me had shifted, steadied, the quiet kind of clarity that usually follows a storm. I made coffee in the kitchen while Clara sorted through a pile of grocery flyers at the table. She didn't say anything, neither did I. Just the clink of my spoon against the inside of the mug broke the silence. As I poured the last of the cream, I heard Lorene's voice floating in from the living room. "I've handled everything since moving in," she was saying to a woman I didn't recognize. "Mom and Dad couldn't keep up on their own, not with all the appointments and house stuff. I took over all of it." The woman made some agreeable noise. I didn't catch the rest. I just stood there, still stirring, my eyes fixed on the ripple in my coffee. Handled everything? I thought about the time I spent on hold with the insurance company when Clara's claim was denied. About the doctor's office visits, the bank trips, the errands in the rain when no one else had time. That was the thing about being useful. If no one sees it, it's as if it never happened. I took my cup and walked out without a word. Later that afternoon, while returning the vacuum to the hallway closet, I passed by Harlan's office. The door was ajar, just enough to hear his voice. He was on the phone. His tone was firm, practiced. Yes. The appraisal came back clean. We'll be signing everything Tuesday. It's just a short-term lien, secured by the house. Nothing unusual. I stood there, frozen. I didn't move until the call ended and he closed the door behind him. That evening, Clara and I crossed paths in the hallway. She looked unusually upbeat, holding a grocery list. "Did you know Lorene's husband is opening another studio?" she said, casual as anything. "They're using the house, just temporarily, to get the loan through. It'll be fine." I stared at her, letting the words hit one by one. "Using the house?" I repeated. She nodded like it was already settled. "It's standard business these days. Everything's under control." "No one told me." She blinked, almost like she hadn't expected me to respond. "Did anyone think to ask?" I said again, this time sharper. Harlan came around the corner and stopped when he saw us. "You weren't on the deed," he said plainly. "Why would we?" And that was it. That was the moment I stopped waiting for kindness and started preparing for facts. I spent the next few hours in the garage sorting through old boxes, papers I hadn't looked at in years, utility bills with my name, property tax statements where I was listed as co-payer, receipts from a roof repair I coordinated back when a storm knocked out half the shingles. I laid everything on the fold-out table, flattening corners, arranging them by date. I took photos of each document with my phone, uploading them into a secure drive. Then I called Dana. She used to work with a real estate lawyer before switching careers. We hadn't talked in a while, but she picked up on the second ring. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I have a question about property law." There was a pause. "Okay, that's a new one. If someone lived in a house for years, paid taxes, covered repairs, even paid down part of the mortgage, do they have any legal standing if the property was transferred without their knowledge? You talking about your parents' place?" "Yes." "You might. Depends on how clean the paperwork was. You'll want to check title history, timelines, anything that proves active contribution. You'd need to file a notice of interest at the very least." "Why?" "They're using the house as collateral for Lorene's husband's business loan. No one told me." Dana let out a long breath. "Send me everything. I'll look at it tonight." I thanked her and ended the call. By midnight, I'd scanned and sent everything I had. Receipts, bills, my personal statement, even a signed card from Harlan 5 years ago that said, "Thanks for covering the property taxes this quarter. We would have been in trouble without you." I didn't sleep much. At 2:17 a.m., I opened a new email and typed "urgent property question" into the subject line. I attached 3 of the most relevant documents. I hovered over the send button. "If they think silence is consent," I whispered to the glow of the screen, "they're about to learn otherwise." Then I clicked. By sunrise, the garage felt colder than usual. The air was still, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of quiet you feel before something breaks. I made coffee, checked my email, and waited. It didn't take long. At 9:03 a.m., Dana replied. Her message was short, but the words stuck in my chest like pins. "The deed was transferred 6 months ago. You're not on it. Lorene is listed as sole owner. You'll want to talk to someone about this, soon." 6 months ago, I had been driving Clara to follow-ups after her surgery, managing their grocery lists, and patching the backyard fence because Harlan didn't want to deal with it. I was in and out of pharmacies, filling prescriptions. I slept in that house more nights than I slept anywhere else. I didn't get a call, not a mention, not a signature request, not even a heads up. I sat with the email for a few minutes, my fingers tapping the edge of my mug. When the silence inside the garage became too loud, I stood up, grabbed my jacket, and walked through the house without knocking. Harlan was sitting at the kitchen table with a newspaper and half a banana. He looked up as I entered, barely lowering the paper. "I have a question," I said calmly, though my voice had lost all softness. He grunted. "Go ahead." The house. You signed it over to Lorene 6 months ago? He blinked slowly. It was time. Time for what? I asked. To erase me legally, since the emotional part didn't take? Harlan shrugged. You were never on the title. And that's your excuse? It's not an excuse, it's a fact, he said, his tone clipped. I heard footsteps on the stairs, and there she was. Lorene, dressed in her usual Lululemon, sipping something green from a mason jar. She didn't stop walking, just slowed enough to throw a line over her shoulder. You were a visitor, Maribel, not a stakeholder. Why would anyone loop in someone just crashing? I let out a breath, not out of exasperation, but to keep myself from laughing. The kind of laugh that comes not from humor, but disbelief. No, I said. I wasn't crashing. I was cleaning, driving, fixing, paying, and you all knew that. Harlan folded his paper. It's done. You can either accept it or keep playing the victim. I stood there for a few seconds more, scanning both of their faces. They didn't look ashamed. They looked rehearsed. Later that evening, as dusk painted the sky, orange and blue, Odessa showed up. No call, no warning. Just the sound of her knock on the side door of the garage. I opened it, startled. Hey, she said, holding a worn envelope. I think you're going to want this. I stepped aside, and she came in, placing the envelope on the table. Her hands trembled a little. I was sorting through some of Mom's old recipe books. This was tucked inside one of them. I opened it. It was her handwriting, Grandma Ruth's, dated nearly a year before she passed. If anything happens to me before I can finish the legal documents, it read, let this letter stand as my clear intent. The west half of the property, Maribel's, because she is the one who still sees this house as home, not a transaction. I sat down. The words blurred at the edges, but I kept reading it over and over again. Odessa exhaled. Clara was the executor, right? That means she either never saw this or saw it and didn't act. I nodded slowly, rage creeping in like a steady tide. She saw it, I said. We sat in silence for a while. The heater kicked on, a soft hum in the background. I don't know if it's legally binding, I whispered, more to myself than her. Doesn't need to be, she replied. You show this to the right people, and it creates enough doubt to make Lorene sweat. That night, I stayed up until after midnight again. I scanned the letter, saved it to the same cloud folder I'd created for all my documents, and started building a timeline. I listed everything, dates, repairs, appointments, who said what and when. I pulled up property records, downloaded PDFs, and flagged discrepancies. Then I drafted a short narrative. I wasn't trying to win in court, not yet. I just wanted the truth on record. Before I shut my laptop, I opened a new message and attached the scanned letter. I didn't put my name on the email. I didn't have to. The recipient, Lorene's main business investor. I'd found his email linked to the press release from her last studio launch. In the subject line, I typed, question regarding property transfer plus pending loan. I hit send. Then I closed the lid, turned off the light, and whispered to the dark, let's see how stable her image stays when the cracks become public. The morning after I sent the anonymous email, I woke up before the sun. The garage was still, save for the faint hum of the heater cycling on. I stayed under the covers a moment longer, listening. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't afraid. I felt like a wire pulled tight, finally ready to snap back. By mid-morning, I was parked outside the small law office in town. I had called ahead and asked to speak with a mediator. Not a litigator, not yet. I didn't want war. I wanted boundaries, and I wanted them enforced by someone who didn't share my blood. We sat in a small room that smelled faintly of printer toner and old carpet. I explained my situation plainly, without dramatics, just the facts. I laid out the scanned letter from Grandma Ruth, the tax records, the caretaking notes I had kept without even realizing why. The attorney listened quietly, occasionally jotting something down. He leaned back once I finished and said, "We can't reverse the deed outright with just this, but we can file a notice of interest on the property. It's a formal declaration that you're disputing the legitimacy of the transfer. It doesn't change ownership, but it prevents them from selling or refinancing until your claim is reviewed." "That's what I want," I said. He nodded. "It'll be filed this afternoon." Back at the garage, I opened the windows to let the air move through for the first time in weeks. I didn't bother hiding what I was doing anymore. If Clara asked, I'd tell her. But she didn't ask. Neither did Harland. They must have known something was coming. By early evening, I overheard Lorene's voice carry through the floorboards. "What do you mean he backed out?" She snapped on the phone. There was a pause, then her voice again, louder. "Pending clarification? Clarification of what?" I didn't need to hear the rest. I knew who he was. Her investor. I closed the window and waited. The knock on the garage door came 30 minutes later. "Family meeting?" Harland called through the crack. I followed him inside without a word. Clara was already seated at the kitchen table, hands folded tightly. Lorene leaned against the counter, arms crossed, lips pressed so tight they were barely there. Harland opened. "You sent something to Lorene's investor?" I didn't blink. "Yes." "Why?" Clara asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Because you all decided I didn't matter," I said, "and I needed someone outside this house to see that I do." Lorene scoffed, stepping forward. "You were never meant to stay here, Maribel. You made your life a mess and then tried to crawl back into mine." I looked at her square in the eye. "I didn't crawl. I walked in. You just kept locking every door behind me." The silence was thick. Nobody moved. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out the printed copies of the letter, the one from Grandma Ruth, and placed them carefully on the table, one in front of each of them. "I'm not trying to take anything that was never mine," I said, "but I won't let you keep what was." Clara stared at the paper like it might bite her. Harland didn't touch his. Lorene glanced at hers, then rolled her eyes. "I don't care what some dead woman wrote," she muttered. "You should," I said, "because she's the only one in this family who ever made me feel like I mattered." With that, I turned and walked out. Not in anger, not in defeat, but in certainty. Odessa was waiting in her car by the curb, engine running. We didn't speak until we were halfway across town. "Where to?" she asked. "Anywhere with room to breathe," I replied. That night, I stayed at Odessa's for the first time since all of this began. She had set up a cot in her art studio. There were brushes and jars and half-finished pottery on shelves. It smelled like clay and oil paint and safety. Before bed, I stepped outside with a cup of tea. Her porch light flickered as I looked back toward the direction of the house. Their house. The house that used to feel like home. "They tried to bury me in the garage," I said softly, almost to myself, "but I grew roots instead." The next morning, I woke to the scent of cinnamon and brewed coffee drifting through Odessa's studio. It wasn't a luxury, just her regular routine, but it felt like warmth, like breath. I sat on the cot a while before moving, watching the morning light creep across the concrete floor. Nothing in me wanted to run anymore. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't chasing recognition or begging for space. Over the next few weeks, life didn't explode. It didn't unravel or collapse. It just slowed, quieted. I started helping Odessa sort her art supplies. Sometimes I'd raid next to the kiln while she worked. Other days, I took long walks through town without worrying about bumping into anyone. I didn't check the Zillow listing for the house. I didn't ask Odessa for updates on Lorene or Harland or Clara. I taught a small workshop at the library one Thursday evening, something Odessa encouraged. Just 6 women showed up, all in their 40s and 50s. Divorced, widowed, recovering from something no one dared to name aloud. We spoke about setting boundaries, saying no without guilt, speaking even when your voice shook. One woman cried when she said, "I used to apologize just for entering a room." I told her, "Me too." Later that weekend, at the grocery store, while I stood in line with a bag of oranges and a notepad full of ideas for a second workshop, someone tapped me on the shoulder. It was Mrs. Henderson, our old neighbor. She looked me up and down, took in my calm, and smiled. "You always were the quiet one," she said. "Turns out, you were the one with a backbone." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it felt real. "I think it just took me longer to use it," I replied. Word about the letter, Grandma Ruth's letter, had found its way into conversations around town. No gossip, no scandal, just quiet nods and polite shifts in tone when people spoke about Lorene's business. Her investors didn't return. Her expansion stalled. Clara avoided community events altogether, citing overwhelm. Harland kept his same schedule, but looked smaller each time someone passed him in church, without saying hello. I didn't wish them misery. I didn't want revenge. I wanted them to sit with what they'd built, without me. One morning, a month after I'd moved in with Odessa, I sat at her kitchen table and penned a letter of my own. Not to Harland or Clara, or even Lorene. I wrote it for the day one of them might come looking, when denial runs out and silence no longer works. I folded it neatly and slid it into an envelope. I dated it, signed it. I gave it to Odessa and said, "Keep this, for when they're ready to ask, not when I'm ready to explain." The letter didn't accuse. It didn't rant. It simply listed the truth. Dates, moments, roles played. The quiet work, the hours no one saw. The history they'd written without me, corrected in ink only I knew how to hold. Then I turned the page. I visited the nursery Grandma Ruth used to take me to every spring. The same wooden arches still stood over the front walkway. I walked through slowly, hand trailing over pots of marigolds and rows of hydrangeas, until I stopped in front of a slender cherry blossom sapling. The owner, a soft-spoken man with white hair, asked if I needed help. I told him, "Just this one." He loaded it into the back of Odessa's car. When we returned, I walked it to the edge of the small plot I'd rented from the community garden project on the east side of town. The soil was already tilled. I dug slowly, pressing the roots into the earth with my bare hands. Odessa watched from a few steps away, holding the watering can. "What's it for?" she asked. "To remember that roots don't care where they're planted," I said, smoothing the dirt around the base. "They just need room." By sunset, the sapling stood alone, thin and unassuming, but upright. And so was I. As I sat on the bench across from it, hands streaked with soil, a breeze moved through the trees behind us. I whispered to the air, just loud enough for myself. They gave the house to someone else, but they'll never again get to decide who I am inside it. Sometimes, we stay too long in places that stopped being home the moment we stopped being seen. I didn't leave my family because I hated them. I left because I finally chose to love myself enough not to stay where I was erased. And that's not bitterness, that's survival. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Silence might keep the peace for a while, but it will never bring justice. If your presence is treated like a burden, then maybe your absence will become a mirror. You don't need to scream to be powerful. Sometimes quiet choices, walking away, filing a letter, planting something new, are what reclaim your place in the world. Now, I want to ask you, have you ever felt invisible in a room full of people who should have known your worth? Have you ever given too much and gotten silence in return? I'd love to hear your story. Drop a 1 in the comments if this touched your heart in any way, or tell me where you're watching from. And if you didn't connect with it, tell me why. Every voice deserves to be heard, including yours. If this video spoke to you, or if you want to hear more real, raw, human stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps these stories alive and helps them reach the people who need them most. Until next time, take care of yourself. And remember, you don't have to wait for permission to start rewriting your story.